The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the January 2021 Community IT Innovators webinar. I'd like to wish everyone a Happy New Year and thank you all for joining us today for our webinar on IT trends for 2021. Today we're going to be going over about 7 of the most interesting and exciting new developments in IT that are going to impact nonprofit organizations in the coming year. We're going to discuss infrastructure changes, such as removing your server altogether, supporting BYOD or bring your own device, and improved telephony solutions. We're going to be looking at tools to help you improve your business automation. We'll be covering some of the most important new developments in cybersecurity. And finally, we'll discuss what we see happening with nonprofits as they become more virtual as organizations. Good afternoon. My name is Johan Hammerstrom. I'm the CEO of Community IT and the moderator for this series. The slides and recording for today's webinar will be available on our website and YouTube channel later this week. And if you registered for the webinar, we'll be sending you those links later on. If you happen to be watching this right now on YouTube, we encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so that you can receive automatic updates when we post our new webinar recordings. Finally, I'd like to ask that you all use the chat feature if you have any questions during the webinar today, and we'll do our best to respond. Before we begin, we'd like to tell you a little bit more about our company. Oh, where'd that slide go? Sorry about that. Community IT is a 100% employee-owned company. Our team of 36 staff is dedicated to helping nonprofit organizations advance their missions through the effective use of technology. We're technology experts, and we have been consistently named a top 501 managed services provider by Channel Futures, and that's an honor we were pleased to receive again in 2020. And now, it's my pleasure to welcome our panel of experts, and I'd like to invite them to introduce themselves. Johanny?
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for having me here today, Johan. I'm Johanny Torrico, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Community IT. And it's my pleasure to be here with my two colleagues, Matt and Steve, and you too, Johan, of course. And we'll see where this takes us. Thank you.
I'm Steve Longenecker. I'm the Director of IT Consulting at Community IT, and yeah, I'm pleased to be here as well and share the things that I've observed in the last year and what I expect to have coming forward in the year to come.
Great. Thanks, everybody. My name is Matthew Eshleman, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Community IT. In my role, I'm responsible for overseeing the platform development of the tools that we use to support our nearly 5,000 devices that we support, and then also working with clients on developing their technology roadmap. So I learn a lot from the clients that I get to work with, and we'll get to reflect that back here today. So looking forward to the conversation.
So here's our agenda. First of all, Matt's going to look back on this is an annual event. Welcome to those of you who've joined us in the past Januaries. He'll look back at the predictions we made about the year just passed and assess how we did on those. And then these are the trends that we're expecting to talk about. We're going to try to look at the trends through 3 different lenses. The technology itself, which I guess I'm going to try to take responsibility for. The security, when that is appropriate to talk about. Matt will talk about that, and then if there's an operations focus, it'll be primarily Johanny. But it's going to be a free-flowing conversation, and each of us have expertise and things to say about all of those different lenses, so it's not like we're limiting ourselves to one or the other. Also want to acknowledge that there's overlap in these agenda items, so you'll definitely notice that, like there's a point about the Microsoft stack versus best of breed. I'm looking forward to talking about that, but can't talk about telephony without talking about the fact that Microsoft is now offering a telephony solution, which is now part of their stack. So there's overlap, but it'll be a good conversation.
All right, well, let's start off here looking back at 2020 and making sure that we kind of see where we're at. As Steve mentioned, this is something that we have done on an annual basis for the last couple of years. And so I went through our presentation from last year to look at what we said and then kind of lined that up with what actually happened. So last year we talked about trends around the cloud and digital transformation. I think in terms of what happened, none of us could have predicted the impact that COVID would have on the world and on us as an organization that supports nonprofits. I think from a technology aspect, I think that certainly accelerated a lot of cloud adoption as organizations were forced to work all virtually. So I think best laid plans kind of all went out the window. Organizations really scrambled and were successful, I think, in large part in adopting the cloud. And so I think, we were on the mark in terms of making sure that that was a priority for organizations. I think the same thing, the serverless office, we'll talk about that a little bit more detail today as well. Again, really accelerated by the work from home requirements through COVID and mobility, again, focusing more on services in the cloud, video conferencing, supporting personal devices. Again, I think COVID really accelerated that a lot. One case I like to share as a good example of this was in December of 2019, we worked with an organization that was due to replace about 60 of their devices. They had iMacs, so physical, kind of desktop computers, and they were trying to decide between replacing them with the same or going to laptops. And after talking with us and looking through some scenarios, made the decision to switch to going with Mac laptops. And so that was in December of 2019. They replaced all their devices, kind of followed all our cloud and device management best practices. And then they were in a very good position to be able to transition to work from home because they all had secured laptops that they were able to connect to work resources from. So again, I think that's a good transition and kind of saying, these may not be necessarily cutting edge recommendations, but they are really going to focus on, what's the essential elements of having a good IT strategy that's going to be flexible and adaptive to respond to kind of whatever may come. Again, security is a theme. I think there's always security recommendations for every year. And I think what happened in 2020 was that we saw that there continued to be just an enormous amount of data breaches. This year, there were a number that really affected the nonprofit, so-called supply chain, BlackBOD, their data breach. There were a number of others where, kind of nonprofit vendors were impacted. So I think that was a real wake-up call for a lot of nonprofit organizations to realize that, hey, it's not just something that happens to somebody else, but something that can happen to my organization. I think we also talked about Office 365 and kind of licensing, the best mix. And again, I think Microsoft continued in 2020 to have a lot more options. I think that's kind of consolidating now in terms of what are the best options for nonprofits to take advantage of. The pricing thing is solidified. And I think there was some new stuff. We weren't quite aware of what Microsoft was going to do with the nonprofit common data model. It's a little bit afield from what we get into, but it does seem from our perspective that Microsoft is making a big push into the data side of nonprofit organizations and providing that kind of tool and platform through Dynamics to really take on, the traditional big names in that space. And then finally, video conferencing everywhere. That sure happened. So, all right. I'll hand it back over.
Yeah, so we made a lot of predictions about mobility and cloud, and thanks to COVID, we got them all right. So kudos to us. So the first trend that we're expecting in 2021 is that we already said it in 2020 that organizations are going serverless. In 2021, I think we're expecting that more of that will happen for sure, and that larger organizations that in the past we would have said, oh, you got to have a server, right, are going serverless. And we're seeing that happen. We've seen it happen already. We've helped clients just this fall that have quite a few staff people that just says like, we don't need servers anymore. We're going to move everything to the cloud. In the past, servers provided file storage, printer management. You definitely did device management and group policies from a Windows server. in the deeper past, email was something that you'd see on a server. That's been in the cloud for a while now. And then I think the last and hardest thing is the servers that are hosting on-premise line of business apps, the databases, the financial platforms and so on that are running on-premise servers. Those are harder sometimes to figure out how to move to the cloud. But the cloud can do all of it now, and it's just getting better and better. The latest thing for us is that we've signed a contract with a vendor that provides printer management, cloud printer management, and we're really excited about, and it's not expensive either. And so we're really excited about offering that to community IT clients. This is something that was still difficult, that you want to get rid of your server. You have 30 computers in your office. You get rid of your server, and then you get a new printer, and you have to walk around to every single computer and say, here's our new printer, and like do a 10-minute configuration job. It doesn't scale very well. But with cloud printer management, that's no longer a big issue. You make one change on your cloud admin interface, and it drums down through the cloud agent to all of your 30 computers, and right away they all get updated. So it's really exciting. The downside of the servers, we really saw it in 2020. Matt was talking about the client that was really happy they had gotten MacBooks for everyone instead of the iMac desktop system. We had real variation in the experience of people dealing with COVID-19, closure of offices. The clients that worked on laptops and that had their data in the cloud were really in a good place for that and didn't struggle. For the clients who had, even if they had laptops, if they were domain joined and they were really configured for that experience of needing to talk to a domain controller regularly, and a VPN was necessary to have that line of sight, you call it, to the server. That's difficult. And then if you have, compliance requirements to change your password every 90 days, you're changing your password, the VPN breaks because you've changed your passwords, you have to go into the VPN setting to update that configuration. And it's difficult, and it's a lot less difficult if you can move to a serverless operational model. So it's not going to be something that every client's going to be done with by the end of the year, but we definitely see it happening more and more, and with larger and larger organizations.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of how that gets operationalized, I think the key determinant now in terms of, can we go serverless or not, is really more driven by, what kind of on-prem or legacy business applications do you have, as opposed to how big your organization is. We can support, organizations that are 100 staff that basically have no servers because all of their applications are in the cloud. I think it's really impactful for, those organizations that still have, the accounting database, in the office, or, community IT. We have our privilege access management tools on-prem. We have our client management databases is on-premise. And so we're kind of tied to some physical infrastructure, and migrating that into the cloud right now is kind of a cost prohibitive or a feature parity issue right now for us. So, going to the cloud just for the sake of it, maybe not the best move, but I think the real driver right now is kind of applications. I think last year we saw certainly the acceleration of files going into the cloud, and I think that was the big thing tying organizations to their on-premise infrastructure. Now that files are largely in SharePoint or Dropbox or Google Drive, it certainly opens up a lot more use cases for kind of getting rid of that server. I think certainly as we prepare and deploy new computers, they're almost entirely going to be, Azure AD joined for the most part, in terms of being connected to the Microsoft Azure Active Directory, as opposed to being tied to an on-premise directory. And as I think as Steve mentioned, the other thing that's really kind of ties you to on-prem infrastructure are just little things like printer sharing. And so if you can, find a solution like we have with a third-party printer management, that makes it a lot easier and kind of removes one of those barriers to adopting into the cloud. So again, I think the transition for serverless is not so much kind of how many nodes you have, but the reliance and how many people are tied to those on-prem servers, just because the authentication requirements, again, as Steve mentioned, if you have to reset your password, you're, in a domain joined computer, there's an update that your computer needs to make as well. It's not just your cloud-based account. So tying those two things together, or disconnecting those two things, is really allows you to get rid of the servers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just to add to your first slide there about the predictions, Matt, thank you for putting that together. I think as I was preparing for this webinar and I was kind of listening to the 2019 version of this, it struck me how we sounded so hopeful about, how nonprofit organizations were kind of slowly embarking on kind of moving things to the cloud, right? Like files to the cloud or all of those things. And so we were hopeful that that was going to happen in 2020. And little did we know that that whole transformation was going to be accelerated so rapidly because of the pandemic. So thank you for putting that together. I think going back to trends, I think something that that I see two things that I saw happen in terms of around operations and moving from physical office to remote is that, one, those organizations that were actually already using laptops or had already kind of made that investment on using laptops instead of the desktops, or moving email to the cloud files, even moving their phone system to a cloud-based phone system. They have an easier transition to go virtual. And so they were better prepared for that. And I think in terms of community IT and the organizations that we work with, I was very glad to see and happy to see the majority of the organizations that we work with, and this is to your point, Matt, they were kind of, well prepared to kind of, flip the switch to virtual. And that was nice. That was nice to see. I think one of the things that we kind of also saw happening as part of all these serverless and the transition to remote is kind of that adoption to the zero-touch deployment with Microsoft Autopilot. And I think I see that we have a few organizations that kind of have embarked and enrolling into Microsoft Autopilot, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of what that is briefly, but I see that kind of continuing, and we are planning already, and kind of that is getting a lot of attention for the organization when it comes to planning that we work with. So Microsoft Autopilot is basically, in simple terms, a self-service deployment service. And it basically auto provisions kind of a set of capabilities and then lets you customize the Windows 10 out of the box experience. So you don't need to create a custom image as we needed to do before, and you don't need to waste resources on kind of manually re-imaging computers. So I think the promise for Autopilot is, I see it as two. One is it will help reduce the deployment costs of workstations, and two, it will definitely create a better end user experience, and especially now that everything is being remote, it's actually making it much easier for users to kind of and the IT department to kind of deploy those new workstations. So you need to do some configurations in the back end, and I'm not going to talk about that because I'm not very technical, and that's Matt and Steve arena. But I can talk about kind of about the user experience when Autopilot is actually deployed for the organization. So with Autopilot in place, once the PC arrives at the end user, the employee, all they need to do is unbox their computer, power it up, connect it to the internet, and then they will be presented with a customized login screens. The employee then will use kind of their company credentials, and Autopilot will configure their PC. The PC will automatically be joined to Azure Active Directory. They will be enrolled in Intune. They will kind of upgrade to like Windows 10 Enterprise, install the latest Windows versions, updates apply. And, and again, all this needs to be configured in the back end with Microsoft 365 and Azure Active Directory. But once it's in place, all that user experience will be definitely be elevated. And because of the integration with Intune, all personal settings are applied. The corporate policies are pushed through. So if your users, for example, need local admin access or it's an admin role, you could manage all that in the back end with Microsoft 365 and make those changes automatically with Autopilot. You can also install all the Office 365 5 applications, any line of business applications, that need to be installed. And for us, it actually even allow us to push our community IT's monitoring agent. So they don't even need to call our help desk to help them install the agent, because that will be kind of taken care of with Autopilot.
Yeah, it's really great. I mean, this year especially, a client wants to replace a third of their laptops, and instead of having them all shipped to the office and then having community IT dispatch someone out to unbox them all and set them all up, and it's like if you're doing 10 laptops, that might be a day's work. Instead, we just had Dell ship them directly to the users. We got the end users' home addresses, and the box arrived, and they unboxed them and logged in with their organization's Office 365 credentials, their username and password, email address and password, and the rest was just sort of how Johanny described it. It's pretty amazing. I mean, the downside that I really noticed, and it's because I'm such a penny pincher in my personal life, is, if this, we're out of DC, so if the client had a DC office, and they're a nonprofit, they have like a sales tax exemption for shipments to DC, but then they might have staff in Maryland and Virginia, and so they're like, do I want to save a lot of trouble, or do I want to save $75 in sales tax? And it pretty much exclusively went with save a lot of trouble. But it incents you to have all your staff work in the same jurisdiction. That this doesn't apply to nonprofits in California or whatever, probably, but it definitely impacted DC, where a lot of staff don't live necessarily in DC. They might live in Maryland or Virginia. It's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Sorry, didn't mean to hijack that, but yeah, it is really cool. Autopilot's really cool.
Yep. No, this is all great. I think the next trend that we see was about company-owned computers versus personal devices, and I'm gonna pass it to Matt so that he can walk us through, kind of the different scenarios there and when to do that, and talk about security and other considerations to take and to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think also on the COVID trend, if organizations didn't have laptops, and that was an easy transition for staff to make, obviously work was still getting done. I think we have been very fortunate in that, the vast majority of our clients have continued to operate and to continue to operate at the same staffing level, kind of post-COVID as they did at the beginning of the pandemic. So, we're very fortunate in that regard. So we're supporting the same number of staff. The number of kind of quote unquote organizational managed devices, has been reduced. I think as, not every organization had laptops to hand out to staff. And so the desktops, the people had been using that were in the office, are still sitting there, turned off as of, March 13th. And so obviously the work continued, and people were using personal devices to do that, I think out of necessity. And I think for most organizations, that is an okay decision to make. But I think there's some really important kind of realizations that organizations need to acknowledge if that is going to be the case, in terms of that bring your own device, BYOD, allowing personal devices to connect to, quote unquote corporate or organizational data. I think policy is really important in this regard. We talk about a lot of that kind of in the security context. What is the organizational framework for making decisions? I think in general, lack of the so-called insider threat at nonprofits is perhaps a benefit. I think people work at nonprofit organizations because of the mission fit, because of the alignment in general. We're not so concerned about people kind of working and being malicious internally in terms of sabotaging the organization. But with that being said, I think it is a worthy thought exercise to kind of go through and ask that question. What happens if our internal planning documents that we have end up on the cover of Breitbart or Newsmax, and what controls do we want to have in place so that we can protect our organizational data? And if that data is being accessed on a personal laptop, and then that staff person leaves and they've downloaded a copy of all your synced files that were in SharePoint or Dropbox or OneDrive, what risk does that put the organization in, just having that data walk out the door? Again, if you're in a compliant industry, like if you have HIPAA compliance or even PCI compliance, that can be a real significant security threat to the organization. Just kind of allowing that to happen. So again, I think it's the flexibility of nonprofit technology is great, but at the same time, I think a lot of nonprofit organizations have just kind of not really acknowledged the risk that using personal devices in a corporate setting or organizational setting.
It's not just the data leakage, Matt. I mean, I'm not suggesting that you thought that's all it was, but there's also just the simple technical risks of personal devices maybe being used by the teenager in the family. Also, who knows what malware is on them, and they're connecting to your resources and potentially bringing bad stuff in. It's like it's a hole in your security posture from that perspective as well. I mean, I think Community IT definitely still strongly recommends that company-owned devices is the way to go. There's a lot more. You have control. You can feel good knowing that that if whatever policies apply to those devices are well enforced, that the antivirus is up to date, that the Windows patching is up to date.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge that sometimes BYOD is a policy of necessity.
Right. And it's interesting because as we were putting these slides together, like we went actually back and forth, the four of us, if we should include the personal devices as a trend or not, because we don't know, right? Like I think something that you mentioned, Matt, is we've seen a decrease on the active devices that we monitor, and then we also talk about organizations still working or having prior to COVID having desktops instead of laptops, so that mobility piece was not there, so they were forced to work remotely and then use their their laptops or their personal devices, and then that caught organizations without kind of having a well planned out, right, like the policies in place to kind of safeguard their data and go about and think about all the considerations and risks that using personal devices implies, and like you mentioned, Steve, Community IT stance continues to be on emphasizing the use of company-owned devices that are monitored and managed by the organization because of all the things that you mentioned, patching and making sure the hardware is still it's new, it's being patched, and all of those things that actually kind of protects the integrity of the data that the organizations should be thinking about. And I think the main risk in my mind that the use of personal computers presents have to do with the organization's data. So and the other one is also kind of what is the level of risk tolerance that the risk tolerance that they're willing to take about that data loss or data compromise. And the other thing also to consider as I'm thinking about this is like, does the organization abide to any compliance regulations, right? Like I think that it's an important piece, and it's something that Matt has touched upon on some other webinars when he's talking about IT policy. So, and there are technical controls in place that you could put in place, and Matt or Steve can talk a little bit more on that, especially if you're within kind of the Microsoft 365 umbrella. There's something that you can do on the back end to kind of control access to the data and manage some of those devices.
Right, that's a good point. Yeah, I think Matt's point that acknowledging what you're getting into with BYOD and then mitigating what you need to mitigate, or if you're not going to mitigate everything, at least having your eyes open on what the risks are. That point about using like some of the things that Office 365, some of the handles that it gives you. Just the other day, a senior engineer and I were setting up a policy on a SharePoint library for a client that allows that SharePoint library to be accessed in the browser from any device, personal or company owned. But in order to actually download from it or sync it, the Microsoft, it had to be basically managed by Microsoft. The device had to be owned by the company, and there's ways that it can check on that. So there are things that we can do to make BYOD acceptable, and we'll see. it might be that when we all get back to regular life after COVID's over, that we'll see a much less use of personal devices. I think it'll be better if we do, but if we don't, we want to try to make sure that we manage BYOD appropriately.
Cool. Should we change gears a little bit now to talking a little bit about telephony? I think the picture is perfect for how I think about my thoughts about telephony right now.
Go ahead, Matt. Tell us about where we are at.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, last year we talked about, video conferencing and that being kind of ubiquitous. That certainly, occurred. I mean, I think Zoom was incredibly highly adopted. It's easy to use. I think they made it free. I know my partner, she was, on lots of, Zoom happy hours with friends that, never done that before. So Zoom, I think, took over. I think telephony, on the other hand, I think people are asking the question, like, who needs a phone? The only people that call me are other, salespeople and Microsoft calling back about technical support tickets. So, I think the need for a kind of a traditional phone system and kind of the financial investment that entails is really, really dropped off, I think, precipitously. Microsoft has also added in phone capability within Microsoft Teams. It's a feature, a license feature. The telephone system is a license feature of E5. And now they've made calling plans, so the ability to actually call regular telephone numbers available as well. And so I think that's an affordable option. So I think for most organizations, if you need to have an organizational phone number and be able to call out and be reached by that number, if you're spending more than $15 a license, you're probably paying too much. And I feel bad for all these telephony vendors that, have kind of built up, their own practice and they've got, their own collaboration tools. I just see them getting blown out of the water because, organizations are either in Zoom and they'll just add the phone, phone calling on Zoom, or they're in Teams and they'll add it on Teams. And, phone calls are over. So I think this is, nobody's used their phone in the office for a long time. And if you had a traditional phone system, you probably didn't even redirect calls. I think organizations that were using VoIP systems, obviously, were able to redirect that. But I think, 2021, no more phones.
Yeah, that's interesting. I had, sorry, Steve, let me just
go ahead.
Jump in with my little story here. I work with an organization, actually, that moved their phone system to a cloud-based provider. A few months COVID hit, and they had before this new cloud-based phone system, they had an old-fashioned phone, and they were, it was doing the traditional. It has the traditional features of multi-auto attendant and the physical phones and the basic of voicemail to mail and phone forwarding, those type of things. But they were looking for, an easier way to manage and provision the user accounts, something that was more friendlier and a plug and play physical phones and e-faxing and all of those type of things. So they found a vendor that they liked that actually checked all of those boxes. And at that time, and I'm talking before COVID, right? And before actually Microsoft Teams was, kind of what it is now. So they offer also that video conferencing capabilities, and they also offer that instant, so bundle that, right, on their system, the instant communication, kind of the mirror the Slack capabilities. And at that time, this organization really liked
which was only a year ago. That's the crazy thing, right?
Yeah, isn't that crazy? They really like they really like the piece of the video conference and the Slack capabilities because they were paying for an Slack account and they were using Zoom for meetings. And so they were seeing this cloud provider as a replacement to that and some cost savings in the long run. So this new phone system was put to the test last year, and it is very interesting to look back actually to the full utilization of the new system. Well, everyone was remote because it didn't handle all the virtual phone connections in the meetings as well as they had, advertised. And, this organization realized that they no longer needed the physical phones. They really didn't use or need the additional features of video conference and the Slack-like communications. because they were not as rich as Zoom or Slack or even Microsoft Teams now. So it was an interesting, I guess, case study, at least, or an interesting thing for me to kind of, see kind of that progression of the cloud base, and then COVID, and then now kind of where they landed and the lessons learned there for them. And I know, Steve, that you actually had a flow of requests for training for Teams and Zoom as well, right? Zoom to a lower extent maybe, but I know that you were doing a lot of trainings on
2020 saw
Teams.
me do a lot of Teams trainings, for sure. Yeah, it's like I remember sending out, our Teams meeting requests to clients, and it always includes, because we buy the extra thing that allows for you to provide a dial-in number as well. And I was frequently getting people dialing in, and it just never happens anymore. Like, everyone's familiar now with, the virtual conferencing approach now. Yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, telephony is a hard one to totally get rid of. I think especially for the international set, although especially for the international set, doing it over the internet is so much more cost effective. But it is definitely happening. There are no more telephones in 2021, or it's not going to be really gone until later. But it's definitely the trend. I'm totally with you, Matt. Let's go on. We got to keep our time sensitive here. What's our next slide? Oh yeah, this one. I think this is a little bit more of a stretch prediction. I mean, it's definitely going to happen. I just don't know whether it's going to really take off now, or we're just starting to. But we're definitely starting to see it, and that's this idea that so much more of IT is going to be focused on automation and bringing together disparate data sources into single dashboards. We're definitely having to do more of that at Community IT, because we have so many different data sources for the different parts of our client activities, and then of course our billing and all that as well. And we need to sort of evaluate our clients in a single pane of glass. And so we're focused on that kind of data reporting. And there's I don't want to step on other Johanny and Matt's toes on here, but there's the different ways that we can do it. I've most recently seen it in requests for building out Power Automate. They're called flows, I guess, but it's this codeless workflow automation. And it's like basic stuff, but the idea of Microsoft's vision is that, the citizen developers are able to work with the professional developers to sort of build out little mini workflows to make things easier to get done. So someone updates a file in a library, I want an email to be delivered to someone, or a sign-off approval mechanism should happen where it's all sort of automated and not require everybody to always click 3 different buttons to make things happen. We're seeing it. We're seeing it. Just the trickle of it. But we think it's going to be a part of our business going forward, and that's just going to sort of catch energy going downhill, because it's definitely the future.
Yeah, it's a lot of kind of business process automation that kind of Microsoft is trying to do. I think, as you mentioned, Steve, at Community IT, we definitely started using. I started using Power BI and some other folks in the company to track. I did it to track KPIs that were important to look at weekly as a result of the pandemic. And I can just speak about Power BI in general. I think Microsoft invested a lot of resources in this platform last year. There were some headaches with Power BI, like consuming a lot of computing resources on your computer, and differences between there's a version of Power BI desktop and the Power BI online, and there was a big gap between those two, what we can do in one and not the other one. I think that gap has been closing down. It's nice to see that, and also kind of the added technical capabilities and more things that you could do, that they are always updating their platform, and so that's nice to see. I think I integrated Power BI with our ticketing system and several Excel spreadsheets, and automate the data gathering, created reports and dashboards. It is a very powerful tool. It requires some learning, right? You need to get it. It requires some getting used to. It's a little bit complex. Yeah, it's definitely
same
more
with Power
advanced
Automate. Yeah.
Yeah. There is some out of the box things that you could do, but if you want to kind of, get into the weeds and do more advanced stuff, there's some learning curve there. But once it's just as everything, right? Like I think once you kind of learn and understand the logic behind it, the things come more easier to do. And so so there's a lot of kind of the level of analysis that you can get once everything is set up. It's great. And I know, Matt, you also have done. I use Power BI, like the out of the box reporting and things like that. But I know that you or your team has also done some really cool stuff and more complex applications and integrations last year as well.
Yeah, I mean, so in our team, we're doing a lot more with API integration, which I think has been an area of tremendous growth. And I think it's an area that we'll see a lot more growth. And so API is application programming interface, and so it's a way to kind of pull data and manipulate it between disparate systems. So we have some extra capabilities in our team, and so we're able to pull data from like our backup reporting system, from various security tools that we have, and kind of combine and analyze the data there. And I think that's really been a differentiator for us to be able to get information out of systems. And then it's also been a way for us to push data into other systems and really increase our efficiency. So APIs, we made extensive use of in 2020, and I only see that increasing as we go into 2021. I think the other thing around this kind of data reporting and business automation is just, I think, the proliferation of apps. That's the one thing, we have our main core systems, which are, we're great, we're heavily invested in, but it's clear that they have some gaps. So, for each of those gaps, we've got a custom code development, or we've got a third-party application to do it. And so I think that's a challenge that, I assume many other organizations face, is just, you need this $99 a month tool to do this job, or maybe the $79 a month tool to do that job. And so those things can really add up. And I think proliferation of those systems can be a challenge. But yeah, I don't necessarily foresee that going away. I think that extensibility through APIs is only going to increase as you need to pull data between different systems to either get reporting and metrics out of it, or to increase your efficiency and automate some of your organization's processes.
Yeah, it's a trend for sure. Let's talk about the Microsoft stack versus the best of breed approach. I'll start by saying that we've been pretty impressed, I'd say, with the benefits of staying in the Microsoft stack. I think Microsoft's nonprofit pricing that they've been committed to historically for so long has definitely helped tip those scales. So especially for clients who've gotten used to the Microsoft, the basic Microsoft products like the desktop suite, that's always a starting place. If you have staff for whom they live in Word and Excel already, it just sort of builds out from there. And Microsoft's very effective at leveraging all their touch points within the stack and integrating between them. And it ends up building a really compelling case for staying in their world. Like just one example, if you are a Microsoft Word user, the fact that you can actually co-author, have two people editing a Word document at the same time in Microsoft Word, you can actually see their cursor moving around. You can do that if the Word document's stored in Office 365. In other words, in Microsoft's data center. You can't do it if it's stored in Box or Dropbox. So just staying in their little world, it's like you don't get to do anything necessarily exciting, but you have sort of Microsoft building out the experience that's good enough on all fronts, and it's not expensive and it works, and that's the compelling case. But yeah, I mean, there's the company who said for the best of breed approach as well. Johanny, do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. There's definitely an advantage on standardizing a Microsoft 365 stack for sure, Steve. I agree with that. But there are some organizations that we work with, either they're either totally outside the Microsoft ecosystem, or they are running some sort of hybrid where we have email and files on 365, and then they're using Slack for instant communication and collaboration instead of Teams, or they use Zoom for phones and video conferencing, and then Okta instead of Azure, those type of things. Shout out, I would say, I want to give a shout out to Microsoft for focusing on bringing their similar apps to parity with these three, and especially the growth that we have seen with Microsoft Teams in the past few months. And just briefly talking about Slacks, because I think both Slack and Microsoft Teams definitely are excellent chat applications for companies. But I think ultimately the choice between the two depends on what you're looking for in a collaboration app. If you need, a specific type of app integration, or if you want to have that seamless integration with within Microsoft apps. From I have learned from recent discussions that I had with Slack users is that the familiarity that they have on that platform, given that Slack has been the leader for so many years, and Team is just catching up in the past few months after COVID. So, the other thing is also that Slack is kind of it's a platform agnostic, and it works great if organizations are outside, like I mentioned, the Microsoft ecosystem, right? Like if they are using G Suite, Box, or Dropbox, Slack definitely integrates better with that. I think Microsoft Team wins, as you mentioned, to your point, Steve, whenever, they're using everything under the 365 umbrella, then Teams is definitely a winner there. And I think the other also thing to note here is that Teams, Microsoft Teams is included on the nonprofit pricing or the free subscription. And that is also kind of something that has, give them a leg when you compare them to Slack. And then the same thing applies to Okta and Azure, right? Like, Azure is part of the Microsoft 365 and the Windows world. And so if you have Windows computers, then, there is a seamless integration with Azure and your single sign-on or your multi-factor authentication. But Okta does a great job. It's a strong product, especially if you are outside, if you have Macs and you're outside that Microsoft stack. They also provide nonprofit pricing, and it's not as generous as Microsoft, but it's definitely there.
And I mean, what I would say is that while this is kind of set up as a bifurcation, either Microsoft or best of breed. I mean, I think at the end of the day, maybe the evolution is that you need both. You need it all. Organizations are going to need a Microsoft 365 or Azure AD account because you're going to use Office products. Maybe you're going to be in Gmail for collaboration with external partners. You're going to use Slack for your chat tool. You're going to use Teams, because there's some internal communications and video calling. I mean, you can use it all. And I think the integrations, are now at a really mature point where you're going to be able to tie all those systems together with a single username and password and multi-factor identity so that it's easy to use and it's secure. And so you don't have to pick. I think just like going to the cloud, it's not necessarily an all or nothing strategy. Recognize you don't have to pick just one or the other. You can do it all. I think it is important to have, a good IT governance perspective in terms of identifying where data is and when to use what. But you can certainly be flexible and incorporate a wide range of tools in your toolkit to be a productive organization.
Yeah. I think what I like on the Microsoft stack when you have all those applications is the ease of management. So it's easier to administrate because you have everything there. And so if you go with the multi-cloud solutions, then the management of all of those solutions can become challenging.
Matt, do you want to talk about security?
Hey, I always love to talk about security, and I'm glad there's so many people here asking questions. And again, encourage you, if you've got questions, go ahead and use the chat. I see Johan is diligently responding to some of those. I'm in there chatting as well. So thanks for those questions. go ahead and send one, and we'll probably have a couple minutes to get to it. I mean, I think cybersecurity trends, before I really get rolling, so next month, we will be releasing what will be our 3rd annual nonprofit cybersecurity incident report. And so that's where we look at the security incidents that our team analyzes and responds to. As we said, we work with about 5,000 users, and so we have a pretty good perspective on the types of security risks that nonprofit organizations face. So we'll reflect back that during next month's webinar. I think in terms of the trends, there's just a lot. There's a lot of stuff out there, and 2020 was kind of no different. It's kind of more of everything. More targeted spear phishing, more account compromises, more big vendors getting compromised, and so the risks are out there. The risks affect all organizations. Nonprofits aren't too small or too insignificant to be impacted by these cyber events. And the trend, and I think it continued. I've probably been saying it for 3 years, but I think organizations continue to invest, I think, more and more time and energy and thought around protecting themselves. I've probably filled out more cyber liability insurance applications on behalf of our clients this year than any year before, and it's because I think organizations realize the impact that a cyber attack can have on their organization. So the good news is that the tools are out there to have a really well-run and really secure organization. I think the shift to the cloud has improved that security. There's a question in the chat, hey, is going serverless going to help my security? I think, yes, to an extent. I mean, you're going to reduce surface area. That's kind of the name of the game, reduce the number of ways bad guys can get into your network. And so again, if you are, if the server is like hosting critical services, and you move that to cloud vendors that are going to be better able to protect and report access to your data, I think that's all the better. I think that's probably a big trend, is our ability to identify and respond to security incidents is a lot quicker. With legacy on-prem systems, it could take a while to kind of figure that out. I think with cloud tools, the turnaround is just a lot quicker. But again, there's lots of great tools out there, for protecting for the endpoints. Multi-factor authentication is now ubiquitous. It's available at every platform. Everybody needs to turn it on. And that's, kind of the number one thing that you can do to protect your organization and your data. And then, as I said before, I think attackers are out there, and they're, nobody's immune from this. They're financially motivated. I think, we saw that particularly in the nonprofit sector with Blackbaud's data breach. Breached a significant portion of their online or hosted resources. Blackbaud themselves paid a ransom to the bad guys, to make sure that they deleted the data. And so, this is big money. This isn't just a hacker, with an IQ of 197, sitting in their parents' basement, messing around for fun. These are organized crime entities for the most part. I think that's referenced in the Verizon data breach incident report. And otherwise it's state-sponsored actors. So if you're a policy think tank group, you're going to come under their watchful eye. So again, I think the pressure on organizations to get their house in order from a cybersecurity perspective is certainly strong. There was a question in the chat in terms of are we seeing organizations shift to Chromebooks or Chrome OS from a security perspective? I would say no. I think we are seeing use of more Chrome OS, kind of in data collection operations. We are supporting, I think, more charter schools and them as they support work, kind of education from home. So I think that's a play in the education sector. I think still at the end of the day, most of the clients that we're working with, I think the focus is on kind of performance and productivity. And that still is something that requires, a Windows computer or a Mac OS computer where you can install software. The webification, I think, from a management perspective is nice, but it doesn't meet all the use cases for most organizations. Certainly if you can do it, that's great. But what we're finding is that even with the shift, a lot of things to the cloud, there's still, kind of things that need to be installed or things that need to be run locally on a device. So, again, there's lots of great tools on the cybersecurity front to, to protect organizations. And we'll talk actually more about that in the webinar next month. So let's see, last one. So last slide we have here is just around virtual organizations. Community IT, we were a distributed organization for a long time, and more so this year. And I think that's I think a trend that we see here to stay. We work with a lot of organizations, a number of them, their leases expired in 2020, and they've decided to go virtual for the time being. And I think there's going to be a lot of discovery about what organization, what they need to be successful, and does physical presence come into that? So again, I'm curious for folks that are on, chat in or describe, how's your organization been successful?
I think another thing that we talked about on this slide, Matt, that you suggested bringing up, which I think is an interesting one, particularly for in the nonprofit space, is along with virtual organizations, the fact that a lot of our clients have run virtual conferences, which has pros and cons. I think people found that they had better reach and potentially more registrations when a conference was virtual and therefore easy to commit to because there was no travel involved, and maybe you didn't charge as much for the tickets because there was nothing really, it was hard to charge a lot for the tickets, but then it was hard to make money off of them too. At least that was some of the things that one of the clients that I talked to about it, just sort of informally, I was just curious, and they're like, yeah, no vendor hall, we made a lot of money off of our vendor hall, now we didn't have that, so that's kind of an interesting sort of part of this whole virtual organization piece as well. And I don't know if that's going to be a trend or not. If as soon as people can, they're going to go back to regular conferences, or if virtual conferences are really going to become a thing more and more. We'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, personally, I did a fair amount of conferences in 2019. I really enjoy that experience. I think it gives me time away, it gives me perspective. This year, I've signed up for a bunch of virtual conferences. I've spoke at some virtual conferences, but in terms of attendance, I just find it really hard to carve out the time and to get that separation to really be attentive and learn on it. So, I think in terms of access, yeah, I think it's great. I think people can have a lot more reach. I'm kind of curious to see what happens in terms of kind of long-term, how those two things blend in. Again, it may not be an organization just has their big annual conference once a year and that's what they do. Yeah, I think there'll probably be some evolution and learning in terms of what works for each organization and their group of constituents.
Johan, you want to talk about Community IT and its experience being a virtual organization this year? Not because we stopped. We still have an office. It's just empty all the time right now.
For the most part, yeah, we have had staff going in every once in a while if they just need a change of scenery. They'll go in. We've been very diligent about scheduling it so there's only one person in the office at a time, but we have had that option. I know that a number of the organizations that we work with, if their lease came up for renewal, they opted not to renew it and they just went completely virtual. So I know that's been something that a number of organizations have done. I think all of us have found ways to keep working, as organizations in this virtual capacity. And I know that, we were fortunate at Community IT in that, a lot of our staff were already working remotely from around the country, and we had a number of tools and processes in place to support that. I think one of the most challenging things, and it's not a technology, it doesn't have to do with technology, but one of the most challenging aspects of running a virtual organization is maintaining a positive workplace culture. And your workplace is now virtual in some ways, and a lot of the things that you can create culturally in an office, you now have to find ways to create virtually. And I think that's something that organizations are going to need to continue focusing on in 2021. I think there was a real feeling of we just need to get through this in 2020, It's this unusual, very strange circumstance that we find ourselves in. And now that it's sort of become the new normal, and as fatigue sets in, organizations are going to have to find ways to build and maintain and grow their culture in a virtual and largely IT mediated environment. I think for us, one of the advantages that we've had, or one of the strengths that we've really been able to build on, is our employee ownership culture. And as an employee-owned company, we've really over the years tried to empower our staff to feel like they're part owners of the company, which in fact they are, and to really sort of take ownership and create a very collegiate environment as a result. And so that's something, we've held employee ownership happy hours. I've tried to find ways to connect with staff throughout the company individually. I've actually interacted in some ways with a lot more staff than I normally would have through Teams and through one-on-one meetings. And so I think, being more intentional about maintaining and growing company culture is something that is really essential to running virtual organizations. And that's something that I would encourage organizations to do. And I see we are at time. And Matt just texted me, hey, we went the entire time with only saying new normal once. And I swore I wasn't going to say new normal. And 59 minutes, I almost made it. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I do want to remind you of the next webinar, which Matt had mentioned during the cybersecurity portion, Nonprofit Cybersecurity Incident Report. This is our third one now. It's a great look into the kinds of risks that nonprofit organizations face. I encourage you to download and read the report. It's going to be available in the next week or two. And I encourage you to sign up for the webinar next month, where we're going to go over the report. We're going to answer any questions that you have and really take a deep dive into nonprofit cybersecurity. So again, thank you all for joining us today. We are at time. I don't know if there are any remaining questions that we want to take a little bit of extra time to answer, but I've got a few more minutes. I can stay on if Matt, Steve, and Johanny, if there are any final points or questions you want to answer.
Looks like we answered the ones that were chatted in. I'm just scrolling through them now.
Okay.
Yeah, it was fun.
Great.
Yeah,
well, thank you all so much. I learned a lot. I always learn a lot. This is one of my favorite webinars every year. I appreciate your time, and my thanks to all of the attendees for joining us today. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.